Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to this dialogue on AI, catastrophic risk, and what to do about it. My name is Nico Heller, and this is Reboot 2030, a Democracy School podcast. As AI rapidly advances towards human-level capabilities, the debate over its regulation intensifies. Some argue that regulation is futile, and open source AGI will drive progress. But these perspectives overlook critical risks. Unchecked market forces and geopolitical competition could lead to catastrophic outcomes. Yet, we do have the power to shape a safer future. In this dialogue, we revisit the potentially catastrophic risks of superhuman AI systems and explore multifaceted approaches to contain, manage, and mitigate these risks. Our discussion extends to regulation and legislation, examine necessary protective laws and their global implementation status. We also address the critical need for effective governance and oversight, exploring potential global architectures to manage AI development. Ignoring AI risks is not akin to Pascal's wager. The probabilities of severe consequences are real and substantial. We explore how effective regulation, drawing on flexible, principle-based legislation, can balance innovation with safety. Additionally, we examine the double-edged nature of open source AI, historically beneficial yet posing significant misuse risks as capabilities grow. Joining me is Yoshua Bengio, full professor at the University of Montreal, founding director and scientific director of MILA, and recipient of the 2018 AM Turing Award. A pioneering figure in AI and deep learning, Joshua brings crucial insights to this dialogue on developing comprehensive policies for safe AGI. Now I can see that Joshua has arrived, so let me invite him in. Joshua!
Hello.
Good morning or good afternoon.
Good morning. Well, it's morning for me and afternoon for you, I guess.
That's right. Thank you ever so much for joining me again for a Reboot dialogue. Our last dialogue has been cut short a little. Nobody's fault, but it is great that we can continue that discussion because the critical bit really has yet to come. We've already talked about the really catastrophic risks AI potentially poses. Now, for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, I would like you, before we go into a sort of how to deal with these risks, I would like you to briefly just go over that once more and sort of summarize that so that we know what we're talking about.
Sure. Broadly, there are two kinds of risks that can be catastrophic. There's the risk that humans use very powerful AI systems in ways that are bad for society. And then there's the risk that we lose control of an AI that can behave in ways that are bad for society or humanity, right? So the first kind of risk you can understand by thinking what AI provides is knowledge, like as we see in ChatGPT. And of course, that knowledge could be dangerous, like how to build a dangerous weapon of mass destruction, or how to launch a cyber attack that can disrupt, infrastructure, can disrupt elections, how to launch a disinformation campaign that can, change public opinion, change election results. So these are examples of dangerous misuse, potentially catastrophic misuse. There are more, but that's sort of interest, kind of categories that help to think about the risks. And of course, those increase as the capabilities of AI increase. So if the AI doesn't know how to build a biological weapon, then it can't help a terrorist do it, right? So it's very important that we monitor those capabilities, various kinds of capabilities that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. Now, going back to the loss of control category, the second category of catastrophic risks, it also depends on capabilities, right? So if the AI is not as smart as us, then there's less damage that it can do if it has bad goals for some reason. The smarter it gets, if it gets smarter than us, for example, in persuasion, that's an interesting capability that can be misused, but also dangerous in the case where the AI has itself created bad goals. So persuasion, could be superhuman. Like we are easy to convince. Many people believe conspiracy theories and all sorts of crazy stuff, right? You could imagine having an AI that's also superhuman in cyber attacks, and that could defeat our current defenses. And that sort of ability, persuasion and cyber attacks, if they're superhuman, could be used by an AI to do things in the real world, convincing people to do things, taking control over computers somewhere that can do things, and so on. One of the important questions, of course, with loss of control is why would an AI have a bad goal, like a goal that is antisocial? Well, why would we lose control? I mean, so it could be because a human provides the goal, but why would we lose control of an AI that starts having its own bad goals? And a very crucial concept here to understand is the general goal of self-preservation. Okay, so if an AI has as a goal self-preservation that maybe a human provided, or for other reasons I can explain, then, for example, it doesn't want us to turn it off. And it might even act preventively to make sure we don't turn it off, to reduce the chances that we could turn it off, because it wants to preserve itself. That's a little bit like in the 2001 Space Odyssey scenario, if you know about it. Something like this is happening. It's the AI, is concerned that humans would turn it off, and then it kills people to make sure it doesn't happen.
Well, let me just come in here for a second. Now, of course, there are very legitimate reasons why a human agent would want to decide that into the system. For example, if we use AI in the financial markets, then clearly we don't want the AI to crash because it might take the market down with it. So we may actually have a real incentive for business continuity reasons or other kind of continuity reasons to build that into the system, thinking that it actually helps us. But as you said,
Yes.
this can easily be turned against us.
Yeah, I mean, another example is in the context of military use of AI, right? If you have an autonomous weapon, well, it needs to protect itself against attacks by adversaries. And so it may be given a self-preservation goal, or it may develop it as a side effect of other goals. And so that's the sort of situation we really want to avoid, because if there's a superhuman AI that wants to preserve itself and is able to counter our attempts at turning it off, then in order to maximize the chances of never being turned off, it needs to control us humans, all of humans, or get rid of us. That's the Of course, it wouldn't get rid of us until it has enough control of the physical world, like maybe with robotics or something, so it can make sure that it can build the parts that it needs and get the energy, electricity that it needs, and so on. So this is not something that's going to happen tomorrow, but an AI could gradually take more and more control over our society. Also, everything I've been talking about is predicated on AI being sufficiently powerful, like having sufficient cognitive abilities, maybe superhuman abilities, and we're not there yet. One of the things that's important to have in mind here is people disagree about that timeline. When is it that we'll have AI that are like superhuman in enough ways? In the scientific report, the International Scientific Report on the Safety of Advanced AI, which I'm chairing, we had a first intermediate report that was given at the end of May at the Seoul AI Forum. We can see that there's a lot of divergence among researchers about when this will happen. But the interval, we don't know who's right, of course, but the intervals go from a few years, like maybe 3 years, 5 years, maybe 2030, to decades, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Some people think it's impossible, but I think most AI researchers think, yes, we will reach human level and more. There's no reason that, machines will be, that, human intelligence is the maximum that's achievable. And there are many reasons to think AI can do better than humans. For example, in specific areas, we already see that, that they can be better than humans. So, I mean, stronger in some cognitive ability, right? Not better morally. So that's the problem, right? In order to avoid all these problems, we would need to do two things. We need to be able to make sure we can construct AI that will behave morally, right? That will not do unacceptable things. And we need the social infrastructure, like regulation, treaties, to make sure that we use the right recipes for building AI that's going to be safe, that's not going to harm people.
I think it's quite difficult to imagine. I mean, I think it's kind of part of the human condition is to really imagine kind of these kind of extreme existential risks, or to really imagine catastrophe. I mean, we've seen this in kind of like political catastrophes. The Holocaust. I mean, who would have ever thought that we are capable of this? And yet we were
Yes.
capable of this. There
Eh,
are, or not all of us, but certainly Germans were capable of that. So
Well,
there is.
other people as well,
Yes,
unfortunately.
but I just didn't want to generalize too much. But yes, we are capable of this. But it's hard to really get our head around this. Now, is there a way of helping us to get our head around it? I'll give you an example. There are sort of short to medium term risks AI poses, which are already quite severe in terms of undermining democracy, undermining trust in our systems, undermining trust in our institutions. And that in itself could lead to a political collapse or to war or to all kinds of unintended consequences. Is this something that we can see as a sort of a stepping stone risk, or do you talk about a very different quality of risks here when you're talking
No,
about the kind
no.
of
So,
catastrophic?
so the good news is both on the technical side of how do we, design AI that will behave well, and how do we design institutions to make sure we do the right thing. Both of these, how could I say, like the solutions apply to both short-term risks like disinformation that you mentioned, and long-term risks like loss of control. So, for example, if you think about cyber abilities, well, it's dangerous in the hands of humans and it's dangerous in the hands of an AI that we lost control of. And so we want governments to impose some sort of oversight to force companies to like evaluate those cyber abilities and then like not build the AI or deploy the AI if it has these abilities, or find a way to make sure these abilities are not used in a dangerous way. So that's an example, but it's true for pretty much all of the dangerous capabilities. Um, Even something like one of the red lines that people are worried about, in addition to cyber, is the ability, which is connected, is the ability to copy yourself, many times over, like a virus, right? So this could be used by a terrorist. Like if you want to use an AI that's going to do a lot of disinformation, then having like it copying itself in many places and then wreak havoc in thousands of places in the world, that's going to be much more impactful than if it's only coming from one computer. And also for the loss of control, of course, like an AI that wants to preserve itself, wants to make copies of itself in many places so that you can't easily turn it off, right? So this ability of replication is something that companies should be, on the lookout for. Like, is the AI even able to do it, independent of the goal? Like, ask it to do it and see if it can do it, right? So that's what organizations like the AI Safety Institutes, there's one, the biggest one right now is the one in the UK that was started first, and the US have started their own. And so they are trying to set up tests and benchmarks and standards so that we can evaluate capabilities before these capabilities become dangerous one way or the other.
I see principally two kind of big hurdles to overcome in terms of generating momentum. One has to do with the sheer size of the risk. it makes it very difficult to kind of to visualize it or to even to comprehend it. And so we tend to kind of, we've just talked about this, we kind of tend to play it down. But the other aspect, and this goes in the opposite direction, is the minute probability of this happening. Now, of course, say take pharmaceutical research, when there is a once in a million chance that a new drug might harm somebody, that's a kind of acceptable risk possibly in pharmaceutical research. If there is a 1 in a million chance with this sort of end of humanity, it may not be acceptable. So there is a kind of an issue about, like how big is small, this kind of thing. I mean,
Yeah.
how serious should we take this really minute risk that when it materializes will be the end? And it's like the risk itself is so, the catastrophe is so big and the probability is so small, and both are very hard to grasp.
Yeah. So first of all, let me mention a poll that was taken, I think, last December and published in January across AI researchers. So AI researchers being defined by the fact that they've been publishing in the main machine learning conferences. So these are people who publish in AI, and in particular, like using machine learning, because this is what really the current stuff is made of. And there's, of course, a wide variety of opinions, but if you take like the median probability of, existential catastrophe, it's on the order of 5–10%. So in other words, there's like half of people who think it's over 5% and half of people who think it's less than 5%. And these are experts. And those opinions are changing as, like, if you had the same poll, so there were similar polls like a year before, 2 years before, and the opinions have been going towards shorter time scale, like when could this happen, and what's the probability that it happen, and both, are getting kind of bad, like higher probability, shorter time. So even though you're right, the acceptable risk here is probably very, very close to zero. It's going to be very difficult to get it to, 1 in a billion or something. Basically, you have to prevent those kinds of AI from being built. Now we're getting into like more complicated strategic thinking. One issue is that there's a race dynamics going on. Right now, it's mostly between companies, but we're seeing more and more that the race is being transported into a competition between countries, like the US and China being the most obvious example. And because of that, it's going to be difficult, we can try and we should, to get 100%, kind of coordination of like, let's not build something that has more than 1 in 10 to the 20 chance of humanity disappearing. It's going to be very difficult to achieve that. The political pressure, because of the economic advantage, we're talking about quadrillions of dollars of net present value, and because of the military advantage, is going to, it's going to be very difficult to deal with. And so it's plausible that at some point, somebody, some organization, some country will do it anyways, even though they're taking, risks that are well above, the minute that we think is acceptable. And so there's, and one reason is that we might not have figured out even how to build an AI that is that safe. So one of the interesting kind of directions here is we need to do research on how to build safe AI. So one that will have very low probability of doing bad things, because we don't know how to do it right now. And maybe AI can help us in doing that. So as AI becomes smarter, but before it becomes like very, very dangerous, it might be a tool to help us build AI that is safer. As a, right now, people are already using AI as a programming tool. But as it gets smarter, it might be able to like read the scientific literature in machine learning and help machine learning researchers achieve goals. Now, it could be bad goals like make the AI just generally more capable, or it could be good goals like make the AI, more morally, correct, at least not crossing red lines that we've decided upon. So, yeah, I think it's tricky. I think we do need to do our best to minimize the chances that, at the political level, to minimize the chances something will build something very dangerous. But at the same time, we may need to do that research in AI in order to help us find the solutions, both the technical solutions and potentially even the political solutions to avoid those catastrophes. This is very tricky. There's not like a clear, simple path here to solve the problem and avoid catastrophes.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, basically, in addition to the potential catastrophic and enormous sort of existential risk that is so hard to fathom, and the kind of the minute probability of this happening, in addition to that are the clear benefits that are so enticing on so many levels, economic, military, you name it. So you have this real cocktail. But of course, what we have to kind of add to that equation, and this is something you have been lobbying for and working on quite hard over the last 12 months, is regulation, or any kind of
Yes.
defensive mechanisms. And again, there's a sort of a lead into this. Even if we had the answers now, the coordination issues, the coordination challenges to get everybody around the table and agree on common standards, you name it, common laws and all the rest, is huge. So in addition to the huge risk, the massive benefits, the minute probability, there now is this massive lead-in time, which may work against us, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's people underestimate how long it takes to get global consensus on anything.
Yeah, and I would add that because of the amount of money being involved and because of human psychology, we tend to convince ourselves of things that are not true because it's convenient. It makes us look good, or it makes us make a lot of money. And we will people will be sincere in thinking, for example, that there is no risk, right? So
Or
we
we
should
will
just,
find a solution anyway. I mean, we'll just
or we'll
postpone it.
find a solution, right? So either way, there are a number of people who, in my opinion, are not being honest, sufficiently humble about our uncertainty regarding those risks, and 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 that is showing up as very, very powerful lobbying against any kind of regulation. And we haven't started really working on treaties, but I think it's going to happen at that level as well. So personally, I've been immersed in those political battles, both in Europe for the EU AI Act, and I think the battle isn't over yet. I think for now, it looks good, but there's still a lot of forces to gut the EU AI Act from its, real teeth. And in California, where, the bill hasn't passed, but it is going back and forth between the chambers, and then eventually the governor can veto it. And you can see the big tech is fighting very, very strongly to make sure either it doesn't happen, or we water it down so much that they basically don't need to do anything new. And that's a very, very scary proposition. But what worries me even more, so if you thought, I would be worried because of that lobby, and that lobby is successful, it's able to push things towards less teeth or less regulation or no regulation. And the other thing I'm worried about really is the geopolitical competition. And the reason this one is even more worrying, even though it hasn't really started in full blown, is that at least at the level of companies, they can be coordinated with national regulation, right? So the companies are in a race with each other, but the government of the country in which they are can force them to abide by some standards. But that isn't true at the international level. There is no world government that can tell China and the US, okay, so you have to follow those standards.
Well,
There's no such thing.
there's one sort of like sort of slither of hope or potential, and I'm kind of referring to really to something you've written yourself, and this has to do with that there is this level of sort of like personal or kind of like private or state interest, but over and above that, there are the kind of X risks, I think you call them, the kind of
Yes,
existential risks that affect us all. So if this runs or goes off the rails in China or in Russia or indeed in the US, everybody loses. So there is a
that's
kind
right.
of a layer of risk,
Yes.
which
But
is not.
that, yes, but that assumes that all the major players, like as you say, like, China, Russia, and the US, and maybe, Europe, all the major players are sufficiently understanding those existentialists, because that's the only reason they will sign a treaty, right? You're right, because otherwise it's just a competition. So they just press on the pedal and try to lead as much as you can. But unfortunately, that as we started the discussion, as you said yourself, like it's difficult to really digest the reality of those risks. I mean, it's a little bit like climate change. Look how much time it took for governments to come to terms to the reality of the climate risk. And even now, I think we're still a long way. Like, I don't think governments have digested the risk due to tipping points. So the tipping points, I think, are closer to the sort of existential risk that we're talking about, in the sense that they're not easy to model. So it's harder to be sure that they will happen. But there are enough scientists providing arguments, that this is a plausible scenario, and it could be catastrophic, like level of seas going up by tens of meters or something. And but catastrophic, but humanity is not going to disappear. Like maybe billions of people will be dying directly or indirectly, but others will survive. In the case of, oh well, hopefully, in the case of AI existential risk, well, if there's an AI that is superhuman and has really like bad goals, it's not going to just kill half of the people. It's going to kill everyone, because that's the safe outcome, the safe scenario for it. For the AI to make sure we can't turn it off ever. It's just get rid of all humans. And there are ways to do that. Think about biological weapons. You design a virus that will kill all humans. Eventually it gets everywhere, and we all basically are gone. And so this kind of, as you said, like these kind of risks, there are lots of psychological reasons that people will deny them or ignore them. They will just laugh at it, right? Saying, well, that's science fiction, can't be. But if you consider rationally the different arguments, it's hard to deny them, that they are possible. There's nothing that prevents these things from happening. And so even though these are scenarios, we can't be sure it's going to happen. It's like the tipping points. We should prepare for these bad scenarios and make sure they don't happen. But that isn't what's going on. Hopefully, the political class gets better educated about the risks and they do the right thing. But what I'm concerned about is, imagine you're the U.S. government, and it's going to depend which party's in power, by the way. Are they more like hawks, or they're more, trying to protect the public? So faced with two dangers, like China taking over because they build bigger AI, they have, I don't know, more electricity, whatever allows China to leap forward, which is plausible. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a possible scenario. Faced with that risk, and then China using AI against the US and like basically taking over all democracies in the world, that's a real risk that people are very concerned about, rightfully so. And then faced between that risk, which is very concrete, it's the same risk that wars is all about, being about. We've seen you talked about the Second World War, and so, we've gone through things like this in the past. So it's something that um, people, thinking about international politics and so on, already like familiar with these kinds of thoughts. So there's like a risk that we're familiar with, and then a risk that sounds like science fiction. And what are those people going to decide? It's a toss, as far as I'm concerned. It's not clear.
I mean, there's it's interesting. I mean, if you take, I mean, I think the example of climate change is really quite a sobering one because, of course, the kind of the Paris Agreement of like to try to keep CO2 carbon emissions, below a sort of a level where average temperatures don't go above 1.5 degrees of the historical average. Of course, we've already blown that, most scientists would say. And in fact, again, there was a sort of a kind of a survey or the kind of periodic surveys, and three quarters of climate scientists now believe that we're headed for 3%, like, sorry, 3 degrees over the historic average. That's twice as much as what we had hoped for. And even at 1.5 degrees, it is really, really bad in the long term. So we're looking already at a very dystopian kind of scenario in climate. But of course, the time lag is such that whatever we do today, we will only feel the consequences in 10, 20, 50 years time. And I think that
Yeah.
that's a really difficult thing. And of course, in addition to that, you've got the tipping points. You've got this potential of things really kind of at some point just accelerating beyond anyone's control. So yeah, you have that. But I think with, and again, with AI, you can foresee situations where the tension would rise because X, Y, and Z of kind of like regional or local disasters or conflicts. And of course, you would then use AI to somehow try to contain that, wouldn't you? So there's a kind of in that dynamic, there's sort of a growth dynamic for AI built into that as well. Sort of disaster breeds disaster. There's a sort of a thing. It's very,
Yeah.
very hard to kind of break out of that death spiral. Now, from a science perspective, I mean, as a
Yeah.
scientist, as one of the sort of the founding fathers, really, of machine learning, you must be looking at this and must be thinking, Jesus, well, maybe not Jesus, but, you must be thinking, this is terrible. How can I stop this? A bit like Albert Einstein wondering about what he's done. So
Yeah.
this is really, and so going back to your kind of, stick to your knitting kind of metaphor, what can you as a scientist running kind of a major institute in Canada, and in fact, a really important and influential institute in that area, what can you do to kind of somehow tilt the discourse, the debate, or maybe even research and development in a direction that is beneficial for the world?
Yeah. So right now, I'm spending the vast majority of my time on two missions. One is scientific, and the other is political. So on the scientific side, I'm building up a team that's completely focused on how do we design a next generation of AI that will be providing safety guarantees that, it's not just, oh, we hope that it's going to be fine, but we have mathematics that give us a quantitative assessment of risk that we can use to put a threshold like we were discussing, 1 in a million or whatever. Because right now we don't even have that. Like, you have to realize it's basically like the apprentice sorcerer. That's not what we have. So, it feels good to me, so let's do it. We're going to be fine. It's just intuition that people have that it's going to be okay or not. And so we need to develop methods that allow to quantify and bound that risk. So that's on the science side. And by the way, I have a small group working on this, but in my opinion, this should be the most important scientific project of humanity right now, given the risk that we are, facing. So I hope that many other groups will start working with similar goals. So that's the science part, the research that I'm doing. And the other part of my life is on the politics. I have, I'm lucky enough to have a lot of recognition for the work that I've done. Received the Turing Award, and I've been involved in the movements for the responsible development of AI for now, about a decade. And so I have a bit of credibility, and I think I have a responsibility to use that credibility to steer the public understanding and the political understanding and the media discourse towards basically the precautionary principle, and of course regulation, treaties, and all of the things that are needed for this to work, like for example developing verification technologies. So one of the things that will be needed at the international level for treaties to work is going to be technology that allows to verify that the other guy is not cheating. So over the years, people have developed verification technology for nuclear weapons, and there are a number of researchers are starting to think about, what kind of tools could we develop in AI in order to provide some sort of guarantees that people are using, for example, the AI chips in ways that are approved, say, by an international organization. So yeah, I'm spending a lot of time talking to journalists, talking, to the public in general for explaining, and being involved in the political battles where they are about regulation, also involved at the level of the UN to try to steer towards a greater global discussion about these questions. So that's taking a lot of my time, but I feel like it may be even more important in some ways, because if we find the scientific solutions, we're still not out of the woods, because we still need a political solution to make sure that we apply those methods everywhere. If we don't find a scientific solution, we can still save humanity by doing the right thing politically, basically stopping the development of AI above a level of capability that is dangerous. And so in both scenarios, we need to get the politics right.
I mean, in climate change, and indeed in also in the nuclear kind of energy and nuclear arms, what you found in those two areas, and presumably in many other areas too, is that there's another sort of a two-pronged, but a three-pronged approach. You have, of course, you've got the science, and in climate change you have climate scientists to develop models and use that to to basically educate and to warn and to show where we're headed, to provide a map, sort of a roadmap, and sort of show how unsustainable this is. But on the other hand, they also get often involved in politics the way you do. But of course, there's a third prong, a third kind of leg, and that is sort of civil disobedience, or that is activism. Now, the question is, this is a kind of a very difficult one to approach with somebody as established as you, but surely it must have crossed your mind. Are there other ways in which we can slow this development until we have the tools to control it better? And how legitimate do you consider disobedience and obstruction, or whatever kind of activist kind of strategies people might adopt? How legitimate do you consider that? Is it too early? At what point would you consider it legitimate and necessary, maybe even?
It's already happening. For now, very small groups of people are demonstrating, and I don't think they are like doing illegal things, except demonstrations. Maybe sometimes they're not legal, but yeah, I think this is very important. I think that in the same way that for climate, we've seen the non-experts, the citizens, get in the movement, like basically dedicating their life or many hours of their waking life to increasing the global awareness, putting pressure on governments, putting pressure on companies. I think the same sort of trajectory is very, very similar to climate here. You've got, the lobbies that are very powerful, but you got people. So the interesting thing is polls, not of experts now, polls of like citizens show a very strong support for regulation and, making sure those developments are being controlled by governments and protect the public. The numbers are like 70%, 80%. Like, so it's even like bipartisan, or, basically It's not just because you're on the left or on the right. People want to have a life. They don't want to have this danger, over their head. They want to make sure governments do the right thing to rein in companies that could be acting foolishly. And frankly, I think that there's a bit of a cowboy behavior that we're seeing in some of these companies. So
Do you,
it's
do you
it's
see any
urgent.
scope? Do you see any scope for again, in the kind of environmental sphere, you get to the self-regulatory mechanism, self-certification, soil association for soil standards, and this and the other. Can you foresee a situation where there might be sort of a safe AI kind of stamp that certain products can obtain if they submit to a certain regime of control or of kind of regulation on a voluntary basis? Can you foresee something like that?
Well, that is the current situation. So the leading AI companies, all of them, have committed. First, at Bletchley Park, there was the AI Safety Forum in the UK last November. They committed to some of those things. Then they committed again to even stronger things in Seoul at the end of May this year. And they've committed to the US government. So before the executive order from last fall, the Biden executive order on AI, the White House brought all these companies and they signed a commitment, very similar to, these are all like very similar. And they're basically saying things like, yes, we will submit ourselves to independent tests, like third parties. We will do these tests to evaluate capabilities. We will put the right security around our system so that bad actors cannot easily get hold of them. We will stop if something dangerous is happening, one of these red flags that the test finds something dangerous. So, but the problem is that they've committed to these things, but they are not quite doing it, right? And they've been fighting whistleblowers. So people inside the companies become worried, and the companies have been trying to put pressure on them so that they can't easily speak up.
And of course, there's this thing about unachievable goals. I mean, you said yourself, we still don't know how to make them safe. So to sort of say, well, we're open to inspection to make sure they're safe is kind of saying, well, give it a go. But we don't have any clear standards what we mean by safe when it comes to AI. And even if we had, it's hard to say whether the system is safe or not, isn't it? I mean, we don't fully understand what's going on inside an
Yeah,
AI.
but at least what you can have is, do whatever is the best we know how to do to evaluate the risks. So there are things like red teaming, like capability testing, and so on, and provide transparency about the results of these things, at least to the government, if not to the general public. And well, we don't even have that. So that's the thing that regulation needs to force. So that's, for example, what the California Senate Bill 1047, as it's called, is proposing, and the companies have been like fighting like crazy to make sure it doesn't happen. So they're not honest. When it is a voluntary commitment, they say yes, 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 we'll do those things. When you take exactly the same sort of commitments and you say now it's mandatory, they're fighting like hell against it.
Yeah, it tells you something, doesn't it?
Yes.
Now, this really leads me on to a whole area of IT or of software development, which in the past has been hugely beneficial in so many ways, not just technically, technologically, but also socially. I'm thinking about open source. And we have historically many examples where open source really, and there is a big open source community committed to the public good,
Yeah.
and to making the world and so better. So you would, at some level, you would sort of say, well, yeah, let's kind of see how the open source community can help us with this. But you are very not critical, but you're very careful about this because you see major problems here. Could you go into this a little bit? Why open source isn't the solution in your mind, in your view?
It could be the solution, but right now it isn't. But let me be a little bit more precise. So first of all, my group has released one of the first deep learning open source packages uh, more than 15 years ago. And so, I've been a big proponent of open source in science in general, in machine learning in particular, and deep learning. I think it's been hugely beneficial for the advances in AI and its applications across the world, its democratization. So it has lots of advantages. Even the work that I'm currently doing now in my group on trying to find better ways of training AI that will be safer benefits from the open source packages that some have released, right? So we can use that to go beyond those systems. At the same time, the flip side is once an AI system is released with all its weight, so maybe it costs 100 million to train, and you make that available to everyone, the result of training, which is say 10 million or 100 million or eventually billion. So that means anybody can take that system and modify it slightly. It doesn't take a lot of what's called fine-tuning to modify it towards something that may not be socially good. In particular, the systems that are being released open source, they have been trained to be rejecting bad queries, like help me to do cyber attack or disinformation or build a weapon or something. But it's very, very easy once if the system is open source, it's very easy to get rid of those. It's basically like a superficial layer of morality that can be put on those systems, and it takes like $10 of further computing on these systems to get rid of all that morality. Basically, now the system can do whatever you want. And you can also do what's called jailbreaks, even for the systems that are not open source, but it's just harder. Just with open source, it's much easier to make the system do what you want. And so there's additional risk of misuse and also additional risk of loss of control eventually, as we get to AGI. So how do you balance the risks and the benefits of open source? Because I said there are like lots of benefits, but there are also risks. And I don't think anybody has like the answer to this. It's just a hard problem. But I think maybe there's a simpler question we can ask, which is who should decide where we strike the balance? So I think a system that is not sufficiently powerful to be extremely like catastrophically dangerous in the wrong hands, or if we lose control, probably we should allow companies to open source it, because the benefits probably are stronger. And I don't know where the line should be, because there's already misuse. Think about the child pornography is already happening thanks to current systems, not systems in the future. Cyber hacking, we're starting to see that already with the current systems. It's just going to get worse, but at some point the benefits are not sufficient to outweigh the risks. And I don't think it should be the companies building those systems, the companies that have these hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, to decide that, because they also have financial interests, right? It should be a democratic process, which means governments in one form or another, regulators. So that what I'm saying is there are advantages and disadvantages, and the balance might change as we build more and more powerful systems. And it should be a democratic process, like the regulator, to decide, okay, this is acceptable, this is not. Right now, of course, we don't have that, but we need that sort of process. Now, that's on the political side. On the scientific side, there's interesting research to try to make open source systems. So trained in such a way that it would be hard for a bad actor to modify the weights and still get the capabilities. So right now it's very easy, but there are researchers who are worried about, oh, we're going to lose the advantages of open source at some point. And so they're looking for ways of building AI systems that can't easily be made immoral. And so if that research succeeds, I think that we could get open source and safety. We're not there yet, but I think it's one of the things that is worthwhile investigating.
I mean, one interesting kind of sort of analogy that just comes to my mind right now, and I haven't really thought it through, is in the UK, if I understand this correctly, if you want to have a working gun, you need to have two licenses. You need to have a license for the gun, and you need to have a license for the ammunition. One without the other isn't much use, right? So if you're kind of a collector of historical guns, you're likely to have a license for guns, but not for ammunition. And if you would happen to be a collector of ammunition, it would be the other way around. The moment you have both, it becomes a system that is potentially lethal. And so that is much harder to get than one or the other license. Now, when you think about AI, the kind of the idea of the bullet and the gun, maybe there's a kind of a need for a licensing system, because once you have both, it's not clear anymore who does the killing. Is it the gun or the bullet? It's the system that does it, yeah, and the human being is part of that system. But but take them apart, and they're not really that dangerous with in by themselves. Maybe there is a kind of a sort of a case to be made for modularization in AI, where you sort of say, well, there's certain aspects of AI which we really push open source because it's very beneficial scientifically, economically, possibly even politically, you name it, for human progress. And there's other aspects which are just very, very dangerous. It's when this becomes a system for killing. Is that a kind of a meaningful analogy?
Maybe, but yeah, in general, there are different ingredients that are needed for these systems. For example, I mentioned, I think maybe closer to what you're talking about, are what we call these capabilities. So if you're able to build a system that by construction doesn't have the dangerous capabilities, then it's great. You can open source it. It can't really be used in those dangerous ways. I ultimately, it might not always be possible because we're building systems that have more and more capabilities. So whether we can separate the gun from the bullets in the case of AI isn't clear yet. We might, and then in that case we'd be fine. But we need to do that research as much as possible.
And maybe part of what, I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm just trying to think this a step further. Maybe part of scientific research, part of the role would be to push kind of development in an area or into a direction where these kinds of strategies become more possible. Is that one way of thinking about sort of making it more safe?
Yes, absolutely. And we need governments to increase the funding for this kind of research in academia so that more people work on it. Also, the regulation can have a positive effect on this. So for example, Meta likes to put their thing in open source. And if they see that regulation is coming, like the one in California, that will eventually limit their ability to open source something, because the regulator is going to have a say somewhere, or in California, it might be the Attorney General, then that will provide them an incentive for finding technical solutions. So it could be the sort of solutions that allow, something to be open source, but then cannot be easily changed by programmers or hackers. It would also incentivize companies to do research in safety more generally. Like if they can demonstrate to the regulator that their system cannot do bad things, then they will not be, in the case of California, they would not be sued by the Attorney General. I think in a system that has a real regulator, which is not the case for the California law, like in the EU, the regulator might simply not allow them, so that they wouldn't get a license. So in general, regulation is going to incentivize companies to do research to find technical solutions to make sure their products will not harm the public. And that is one very good reason why we need to have regulation. If it's done right, it's going to provide the right incentives for companies to do it. But I think we also need government funding to broaden the set of people working on this, especially people who don't have a financial interest like academics, and that would be immensely useful.
And of course, regulation, regulation in that field of AI is a bit like regulation in pharmaceuticals, presumably, except that it's such a specialist field that really you do need the research, the academic, the foundational research to know how to regulate and to develop a kind of a regulatory strategy that kind of helps you in the long term. And so when you're saying to do research, you're not just talking about building fancy AI systems that might be safe, but you are really talking about research that's sort of at the intersection of regulation and AI development. Isn't that right?
Yes. So there is, for example, a very important part of the research, which currently is going on, by the way, in the AI safety institutes in the UK and the US, is how do we design these evaluations, this risk evaluation metrics and benchmarks? This is like a whole new science that people haven't been thinking about until recently. And it's very applied research. It's not like, a totally new paradigm. It's just, common sense and risk management strategies. And of course, expertise in machine learning, because this is the material that we want to make safe. And that, I think, one challenge that these government organizations have is they usually don't have expertise in the government in machine learning. So they are on this path of trying to recruit people from industry or academia, and it's difficult. I mean, one of the sort of unfortunate issues is in industry. If you have PhD in machine learning, you can basically make $1 million per year. I mean, depending on how much experience you have, let's say $500,000 or whatever, if you're new. But of course, you don't get $500,000 salary in government. Like, just doesn't happen. So how can government deal with that? Of course, there'll be people who want to do it because they want to serve the public, and they believe in the risks. They want to dedicate themselves to mitigate the risks. But that's not going to be enough, right? So one of the things I've been saying to governments is, well, you can use academia, and you can use nonprofits that are outside of governments, and that, well, in academia, it's not that you're going to get paid $500,000 if you're a PhD student, but PhD students will be working for cheap, basically. And in nonprofits that are independent from governments, well, they basically can compete with industry, and they can hire people, whatever the market price is. So I think the governments should both have internal organizations that really are part of the government to help the regulator with these questions, but also rely on external organizations that could help for the technical part of the work.
How specific do you think, or in your experience, is the kind of regulatory kind of stuff that would be thinking about? What I'm trying to get at is this something that could be transferred from one jurisdiction to another? In other words, is there a benefit of, like, say, European countries collaborating with the US or Canada, or would the legal situation be so different that collaboration would be problematic?
Absolutely. On the technical side, this is already happening. So the AI safety institutes around the world are talking to each other. The US and the UK have signed an agreement, and so they're sharing notes. In fact, they want to make everything they do public, right? Like the methods they're developing and so on, because we want to see an international convergence of these methods. And yeah, there's a great advantage to doing that, both for harmonization and also just to speed up the process of developing these evaluations.
Economies of scale, isn't it? More brains kind of achieve better results. Now,
Yeah.
let's start to wrap this up. I would like to kind of like, are there any books or any kind of any reading material that you would recommend sort of to a general reader who might be interested in kind of getting more involved, understanding better what the issues are in AI risk?
Um, yes. So a good book is Stuart Russell's book from 2019 called Human Compatible. There is also more recently Dan Hendricks, who is writing a book, and I think it's coming out pretty soon. Let me see if I search on Google. Yeah, he has a book called Introduction to AI Safety, Ethics, and Society. That I think is a good, maybe even easier to read than Stuart Russell's good introduction.
Excellent. And any kind of science fiction novel or any kind of literary kind of gem that kind of would inspire you in these kind of difficult times?
Um, I hope that science fiction authors start like really digging into this, because there's a lot of interesting, because there's so many like scenarios. I think in the past, science fiction authors have helped to elucidate some of the risks. In fact, Isaac Asimov, 1942, started working on these novels of I, Robot, and thinking about the laws of robotics, a way to make the AI moral, and basically the novels were about how it fails, what can go wrong. And of course, there's been a few movies. I mentioned the 1968 movie Space Odyssey 2001 is actually focusing on one of the scenarios of how things can go wrong. I don't know. I'm not saying there aren't any like recent, but I've been talking to people who are writing these things, so hopefully these will come out and we'll see more. It's really worthwhile. I think movies would be even better than novels because they will touch more people, and that's really important.
Absolutely. Well, Joshua, thank you very, very much. This has been an uninterrupted kind of dialogue for an hour. I'm really, really happy. We've had difficulties in the past, but this really made up for it. Thank you ever so much. I will obviously keep an eye on the way things develop for you, and hopefully at some point in the future there is the opportunity to have another chat to see how things have progressed. But first of all, thank you ever so much for making time again. You're a very busy man, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks, Nico, for like thinking about these questions and inviting me.
Thank you. Have a good day. Yeah. All the
Thank
best.
you.
Bye
Bye.
bye.